Hello, Namaste everyone. I'm here with question answer series of Unit 38 from Class 11's Compulsory English book. First one act play with the title Trifles. Students turn to page 300. Understanding the text. Answer the following questions. A. Do you believe that Mrs. Wright killed her husband? Explain. Answer: Yes. I do believe that Mrs. Wright had killed her husband, Mr. Wright, as she was spending a difficult life with her husband, which was full of dominance and suppression. As she had no children and no other people lived in that distant farmhouse, she used to feel very lonely. She had no one to talk to. On top of that, Mr. Wright was very obsessive about his wife, and he had killed the canary bird that used to sing for her by twisting its neck. She was so disappointed at this that she took her revenge by killing him in the same manner, that is, by tying a rope around his neck while he was asleep. People do this when it is too much for them. B. Do you think Mr. Wright's death would have been uncovered if Mr. Hale hadn't stopped by the Wrights' home? Answer: No, Mr. Wright's death wouldn't have been uncovered otherwise, as the Wrights couple lived in an abandoned farmhouse. Only two of them lived there and they had no children. Mrs. Hale had also stopped visiting them, so unless Mrs. Wright herself went to report about this incident, this would not have been found out. C. Why does Mrs. Hale think that Mrs. Wright's worries about her preserves indicate her innocence? Answer: Mrs. Hale thinks that Mrs. Wright's worries about her preserves indicate her innocence. As she knows women's nature, women are used to worrying about trifles. Trifles means small useless and unnecessary matters. How would a murderer, when she stays in police custody, worry about her fruit preserves, asks for her apron, or her little shawl? So she thinks that Mrs. Wright is really innocent. How does Mrs. Peters' homesteading experience connect her to Mrs. Wright? Answer: Mrs. Peters had also encountered a similar experience as Mrs. Wright in her life. In her childhood, a naughty boy had killed her loving kitten with a hatchet by cutting its neck. She got so upset at that time that she had almost hurt him if someone had not stopped her. She says that she also knows what loneliness is. When she was in Dakota, she had lost a child when he was just 2 years old. Since then, she doesn't have a child, so she has been living a lonely life just like Mrs. Wright. These are the two homesteading experiences which connect her to Mrs. Wright, so she feels that she understands Mrs. Wright's mental condition. E. How do the women's perspectives on men differ? Answer: In the play, the male characters, such as the county attorney and the sheriff, are unable to find any solid evidence of the murder in spite of their professional investigations, whereas the women characters, such as sheriff's wife and the neighbor's wife, seem to be wiser and much more practical than the males. They understand the whole situation by being attentive to trifles or small things in life, such as the bird cage, the dead body of the bird, apron, dirty towels, etc. Being women, they could feel and understand the real condition, mentality, and psychology of another woman who was greatly suffering in life. Women are dominated, suppressed, and highly criticized and humiliated by men in society, but still they are highly intelligent, greatly sensitive, and very caring towards others' needs. In the play, it is seen that men take women very lightly. They take women's perspective as trifles, but in reality, these trifles are the most important things to be considered in life. Now, reference to the context. Read the extracts from the play given below and answer the questions that follow. A. Mrs. Peters, glancing around, seems funny to think of a bird here, but she must have had one, or why would she have a cage? I wonder what happened to it. Mrs. Hale, I suppose maybe the cat got it. 1. Who does she refer to? Answer, she refers to Mrs. Wright. 2. What does the word one stand for? Answer, one refers to the canary bird. 3. What is the full form of suppose? Its full form is suppose. S-U-P-P-O-S-E, suppose. Suppose is a short form of suppose. 4. What do you mean when Mrs. Hale says the cat got it? Answer, she meant to say that the cat must have killed the bird. B. Mrs. Hale, Wright was close. She used to wear pretty clothes and be lively when she was Minnie Foster, one of the town girls singing in the choir. Choir is pronounced as choir. It is a group of singing people. But that was 30 years ago. 1. Why does Mrs. Hale refer to Mrs. Wright as Minnie Foster? Answer, she was known by that name before her marriage in her youthful days. 2. What does her description tell you about Mrs. Wright? Answer, according to Mrs. Hale's description, Mrs. Wright had a very pleasant and happy life before her marriage. She was free and independent to pursue a life of her choice at that time. She was young and beautiful. She loved singing and she used to sing in a choir of town girls. 3. What does Mrs. Hale mean by that was 30 years ago? Answer, she meant to say that it was 30 years ago in her youthful days when she was young and beautiful and unmarried. C. What was the main theme of the play? Answer, the main theme of the play is importance of trifles or trivial matters in life. Small things or matters make a great difference in life. The play deals with other themes such as male dominance over women, isolation, loss of identity, vengeance or revenge, violence and freedom through rebellion, illustration of traditional gender roles, female unity or harmony, patriarchy, gender discrimination, true justice, and crime as a result of suppression. D. Discuss the symbolism used in the play. Answer. The symbolism used in the play can be described as follows. Number 1. Preserved fruit jams are used as symbols of femininity and housekeeping. Number 2. Pleating an apron is a symbol of nervousness and despair. Number 3. Quilting or knotting the carpet is a symbol of confusion and instability. We can also take it as a symbol of innocence or guilt. Number 4. The rocking chair is a symbol of desperateness and regret. Number 5. Birdcage is a symbol of loneliness, confinement, and restrictions in life. Number 6. Knotting the quilt is a symbol of strangling or murdering her spouse. Number 7. Abandoned farmhouse is a symbol of loneliness and sadness. Number 8. Rope is a symbol of vengeance or revenge. Number 9. Canary bird is a symbol of Mrs. Right. And number 10. The dead body of the bird is a symbol of Mrs. Wright's freedom and wishes, which was dead in that house. E. Discuss the setting of the play. Does it have an impact on the theme of the play? Answer. The setting of the play is an abandoned farmhouse in a rural place. It is described as dark, gloomy, and lonely place, as the house was in a hollow and one couldn't see the roads from it. Yes, this kind of sorrowful setting has an effect on the topic of the place. Just like this place, the main character, Mrs. Minnie Wright's life was also gloomy and sorrowful. She was badly dominated, suppressed, and manipulated by her husband. As she had no children, she felt very lonely and sad in life. She had lost her freedom, independence, and charm of her life after being married to Mr. Wright. Mrs. Wright was indifferent to his wife's needs and was very obsessive of her. So she felt very suffocated and confined in that abandoned house. Now, reference beyond the text. A. The credibility of a character is determined not only by the character's thoughts and actions, but also by what other characters say and think about him or her. Discuss in relation to the characters of Trifles. Answer. There are several places in the play where other characters have described Mr. and Mrs. Wright about their characters, behavior, and Mrs. Wright's lifestyle before marriage. This has been done by especially their neighbors Mr. and Mrs. Hale. They knew them better as they were their neighbors. And from what they have said, we feel sorry for Mrs. Wright, although she is a murderer of her husband in the play. Mrs. Peters, wife of the sheriff, has also been very sympathetic towards Mrs. Wright, as she also has similar life experiences. So, their opinions have greatly helped the readers to know and understand the credibility of a character in the play. B. Dramatic irony occurs when the reader or audience has information that is unknown to the characters in a play. It creates tension and suspense. Analyze the play discussing the author's use of dramatic irony based on these questions. First, what information is crucial to the play Trifles? Answer. The opinions of the neighbors and Mrs. Peters about Mr. and Mrs. Wright is very important to the play. What they said and thought about the couples really helped the readers to understand the true situation in their family and the real cause of this murder. Second, how does the playwright use this information to create dramatic irony? Answer. Men considered women as useless, giving attention to trifles. They generalized women as so much concerned about trifles in life. But the irony shown in the drama is that attention to the trifles helped the two women characters, Mrs. Peters, sheriff's wife, and Mrs. Hales, the neighbor's wife, to find out or distinguish Mrs. Wright as the murderer of Mr. Wright. They were able to understand the family condition and the true cause of the murder. This is the main dramatic irony we find in this play. Third, what effect does the dramatic irony have on the audience and on the play? Answer. The dramatic irony present in the play makes it very interesting and full of tension and suspense to the audience. The male characters, such as the sheriff and the county attorney, acts very professional and clever, but they fail to find any useful and solid evidence of the murder. Whereas the female characters, such as Mrs. Hale, the neighbor's wife, and Mrs. Peters, sheriff's wife, through their deep conversation and by giving their full attention and importance to trifles, they are able to find or distinguish the real murderer and even find the true cause of the murder. Thus, the play is successful to amuse the audience with its twists and turns. This is the end of this session, students. Bye bye and take care.